There are three basic elements that need to be in place for an ESXi host to use an NFS-based data store. In this nugget, we'll discuss what those are, and then I'll walk you through step by step the creation of an NFS-based data store. Let's begin. Very similar to the benefits of an iSCSI network-based data store, we could also choose the option of using an NFS-based data store. And here's the ingredients for making it work. First of all, we need to have an NFS on the network that we can use. So in our lab environment, the iSCSI target that we used in a previous nugget and the NFS are both being provided basically by this device right here, this Windows 2016 server. So what's happening is it's got another interface on the 10.11 network. It's .111, and it's providing those iSCSI and NFS resources that the ESXi hosts are going to be able to access. So we've got the NFS share. It's being shared as /NFS. We've got our storage network in place. It's the 10.11 network. Also, each of the ESXi hosts currently has a connection over to the storage network, and we created the VM kernel port associated with that when we set up the iSCSI in our previous nugget. So we're going to use this storage network and the existing connectivity from each of the ESXi hosts for both the iSCSI and NFS-based data store access. So we've got the NFS share in place, we've got the connectivity already in place. So our last step is create a new data store, and this time select NFS as the option and create a new data store from the resources that are available on the network. So here on DCNUG, our management workstation, and also the Windows 2016 server, let's go ahead and double click on the icon for the VSPHERE web client to launch it. We'll go ahead and log on as administrator at vsphere.local, and we'll supply our lab password and click login. And once again, you want to make sure that when you do these labs, go ahead and launch it and give it like 5 to 10 minutes for the vCenter server appliance to fully come up. And so one of the techniques that you can use is when the video starts, launch the lab, watch the video, and then the lab is sure to be ready for you as you've given it several minutes of a head start to initialize everything. So here in the vSphere web client, let me go ahead and maximize this full screen. And let's focus on data stores. Now there's several ways we could do that. We could, from the home page, click on the home icon and then click home. And then from here, click on storage. Or if we're already in the navigator pane over here, we have the shortcut tab for storage right there. So with storage selected, we currently have in our data center 4 data stores. We have 3 local data stores on ESXi 1, 2, and 3, and we've got our iSCSI data store we created in our previous nugget. So if we want to create a new NFS data store, we'd right click on the data center. From the drop down, we'd hover over storage, and then from the submenu, select new data store. Now, if you're saying, Keith, this looks familiar. Didn't we do something like this when we created the iSCSI network-based data store? And the answer is yes, this part right here is identical. So we'll click on new data store. It's going to go in our Las Vegas data center. So we'll click next. And here on the type of data store is where the differences come in. Instead of making a VMFS data store, like we did on an iSCSI target, instead we are going to leverage an existing NFS share, and so we're going to click on the NFS radio button. So with that selected, we'll go ahead and click on next. And now we have a choice regarding the NFS version. So we have NFS version 3 and NFS version 4.1. So if your storage appliance or NAS device, providing the NFS share only supports NFS 3, that would be the way to go. If it supports NFS 4.1, that would be the way to go. And one of the questions might be, what's the big benefit of our NFS 4.1? And there are a few. Number one, it's stateful in nature. It has better authentication, can leverage Kerberos. And it also supports something called server-side locking for control, especially in a shared network environment where multiple devices, like multiple ESXi hosts, are all working with that same data store. However, if your NFS share that's already out there doesn't support 4.1, you're going to have to use 3. And this yellow triangle right here, this warning is worth a note. And that's this. If we do have an NFS share on the network that does support both 3 and 4.1, we need to pick one and have all of our ESXi hosts use that flavor. So for example, in our case, ESXi 1, 2, and 3, we would all have them use it as NFS 3, or all have them use it as NFS 4.1. But we would not, I repeat, not want, for example, 2 of our ESXi hosts to access it using NFS 3, and the other one accessing it as NFS 4.1. And the warning says if we try that, that could include data corruption, which nobody wants. All right, so in this lab, we're going to use NFS 3 as the type of NFS and click on Next. So we'll go ahead and name it. Let's call it NFS-Datastore. And now it's asking for the folder. Over on our Windows 2016 server that's acting as our NFS share, I've shared it as /NFS. And then the IP address is 10.1.1.111. Now, I'm tempted here to put in a fully qualified domain name that can be resolved to an IP address. But the challenge is DCNUG, who's actually providing the NFS and iSCSI and everything else, it has multiple entries in DNS. So if we put DCNUG's name in here and then it resolved it, we wouldn't be sure we were resolving to 10.1.1.111. Because in reality, we have more than one path to get to DCNUG. We could go over the management network, the 192.168 network, or we could go over the 10.1.1 network. And we want our storage to be using that 10.1.1 network for storage. Another option would be, inside of DNS, we could have an additional entry that's unique, like DCNUG-storage, that points only to that single IP address, and that would work. However, for the lab, if we just put it in the IP address, we'll know exactly where that NFS share is. All right, I digress a little bit. So with that IP address supplied of the server that has the NFS share, we'll click on Next. And it's asking us to choose which of these hosts we want to provide access to that NFS share for the benefit of using a data store on that share. So we can go ahead and select just one of them, or we can select more of them. And the top checkbox can basically enable and disable all of them in one fell swoop. So we're going to provide access to this NFS share as a data store to all three of our ESXi hosts. So we'll click on Next. So here's a summary. So we'll click on Finish. And we have a nastygram saying, Wow, look at that. So recent tasks, it failed for all three of those ESXi hosts trying to access that NFS share. All right. So it says there's a problem. Also, what it did, it put that wizard that we are currently doing up here in the top right. So if we click on Work in Progress, we have New Data Store. We can expand that. So it's basically indicating here that it didn't complete and there's a problem. And one of the cool things about this Work in Progress area is that if we're right in the middle of something, let's back up a few steps here. Let's say we're right in the middle of something and we need to come back to it later. We can go ahead and click these upper two right arrows, which will minimize this window and let us come back to it later. So let me go ahead and minimize that. We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's go check out the NFS share and make sure it's all set up correctly. So I'm going to hit F11 to go ahead and go out of full screen mode. And I'm going to launch Server Manager, this icon here in the taskbar for the Windows 2016 server, providing the NFS. We'll give that a moment to initialize. And then over here on the left-hand side of Server Manager, let's go ahead and click on File and Storage Services right here. And let's click on Shares. So here we have our NFS share. So it is being shared. And if we right-click on that and select Properties, here under Remote Path, it's on DC-NUG, and it's /NFS. So we got that correct. In the literal file system, it's on the N drive with a folder called NFS that's being shared. And if we click on Authentication, and let's do this. In the interest of getting this to just function, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the Kerberos 5, which will only be available with the 4.x flavor of NFS. And then for the No Server Authentication option, let's go ahead and click on the radio button for Allow Unmapped User Access by UID, GID, and click on Apply. And let's see if that makes a difference regarding that share. We can also manage that same information on this server by going into the file system with File Explorer, going to that share, right-clicking, and going to Properties, and the NFS sharing properties specifically of that folder. All right, so with those changes, let's go back to our VSPHERE web client. So here on the VSPHERE web client, let's go ahead and go back to our Work in Progress and click on New Data Store. And let me bring that up a little bit so we can read it. I'm also going to bring this full screen so we can see a little bit more. And let's click on Next, and Next, and Next, and Finish. And let's see if we have better success. So down here under Recent Tasks, if we expand that, that looks way better. So the tasks have been completed. All three ESXi hosts have now mounted that NFS share and can use it as an NFS data store. So let's go ahead and minimize recent tasks back down. And now if we click on NFS data store, and where we are in this interface is under the navigator with the storage tab selected. And then in the Las Vegas Data Center, we've selected NFS data store. And just as a warm fuzzy to make sure this is really working, let's go ahead and use the Upload File icon right here. That'll allow us to upload a file to this data store. So we'll click on the Upload a File to the Data Store icon. And on our local computer here, on our management computer, we have in the Downloads folder a couple files. One is the PuTTY installer. Let's just go ahead and move that one over for fun. So we'll go ahead and double click on the PuTTY installer, and it copied it over. Also, while we're here, focused on the NFS data store, if we click on Hosts, the Host tab up here, it'll currently show us the ESXi hosts which are currently connected to that data store. Also, if we go to the Summary tab for that NFS data store, and we expand this Details pane right here, it shows us the type of NFS that we're using for this data store. It's showing us the server. It's showing us the shared folder, the mount. It's showing us the share. It's also showing us that we have 3 hosts, the 3 that we just looked at, that are currently connected to and can work with that data store. So now, my friend, following the steps that we did together in this nugget, I'd like you to take time and do the hands-on practice. And there's 3 core elements that we need. We need an NFS share that's already in place. Secondly, we need connectivity from a VM kernel port on our ESXi host over to that NFS share. And then the third would be to create a data store leveraging the NFS share. So have some fun with the lab, and I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.